there are two objectives. One, it should be a people-centered organization. First, it should be focused on development. That was where we started from. When you know all the problems on the continent, peace security has a boost in the developmental question. So it should be focused on development. But once you talk about focus on development, you are also talking in terms of the requirement of mass mobilization. Because development is not a leadership-centered activity. It must involve all the people. And logically, a very important and significant element of that group was outside the African continent. People had gone through waves of migration through slavery as economic migrants. They were in most of the leading countries of the world. They had knowledge, they had understanding, they had technological skills. They could play a vital role in rebuilding of the continent. And it was this realization. Soon after the launching of the African Union in 2002, there was a summit in Addis Ababa in January 2003. The African Union was launched in July 2002. And almost immediately after, there was a summit in Addis Ababa in January 2003, where the issue of the diaspora was on the table. States came, Senegal and others, it should be the sixth region. And so there was a very lively debate. And the summit came up with a recommendation recognizing the diaspora as an important component in the building of the African Union. So immediately we did that, the diaspora came. So once that is done, the acknowledgement was that the transformational agenda of the Continental Organization premised the need to build African Renaissance on a platform of self-rehabilitation, where we bring in our amputated and missing parts and make the continent whole again. It's a spiritual endeavor, but it's also a developmental endeavor. Because we all come together to rebuild the continent. And in rebuilding the continent, we also must rebuild the status of our people that are outside. So it's a two-transactional enterprise. The diaspora help to rebuild the continent. It's their family, and the status of that continent affects their own status wherever they are. But it's our family abroad. So we also have a responsibility to see the challenges and difficulties that are facing them, and how we can do it so that we enhance their own self-realization patterns wherever they are, so that they can feed it back into the continent. It's a mutual transaction enterprise. But so what are they? But once you want to do it, there are certain challenges. First is the question of who and what constitutes the diaspora. We have family conversations. So we had an expert meeting in Trinidad and Tobago, to look at the concept of diaspora. They came out with a very good definition. But when it was presented to the summit, they found it the language and something, and then they said, okay, we had gone to the diaspora, but they also wanted the continental experts to look at it. So experts from member states came in, and then the definition of the diaspora was agreed upon in 11 to 12 April 2005 as follows, and I read. The African diaspora consists of people of African origin living outside the continent, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality, and who are willing to contribute to the development of the continent and the building of the African Union. If you don't mind, I read it again, because it's very important. But it's in your something. The African diaspora consists of people of African origin living outside the continent, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality, and who are willing to contribute to the development of the continent and the building of the African Union. I'm going to send to each of you, once you have your database, the arguments that went on. I'll send you a copy of the PLC before this thing was agreed upon. And the definition, since it has attracted some criticisms, even within the panel in which it's some people said we should have a two-part definition. One which will be capture academic and intellectual aspects, and the other that will be policy related to the political needs of the Union. Another delegation insisted, and they put it down. This was that we should add, instead of when we say Africans living outside the continent, we should add permanently living outside the continent. There's a distinction there. Permanently living out. First, it implies that they will not be returnees.
Right. Right.
Secondly, it rules out the whole class of economic migrants called the modern diaspora. People who came from their home states. The third, which was not in the meeting but has come out now, is a group that says, why should they be willing to contribute to the African Union or the building of Africa? They are the diaspora. You must recognize them. They have an inherent right to be recognized. That in the Jewish state, they don't have that aspiratory contribution. So we should just say they are Africans, people of African descent, and leave it at that. Yeah. Now, these criticisms are useful. But in my view, they do not sufficiently address the concepts of the problem. This definition was arrived at after very serious and deep reflection. The experts agree that any working definition of the African diaspora must have 4 basic components. You know, there are so many ways to define a thing, as those of you who have been reading Plato's Republic and so on. You can define something lexicographically. You go to the dictionary, it is A, B, and C. You can design something ostensibly. You say, what is green? You say, this is green. This is, but there are so many shades of green. Unless you have a complete definition of green, you cannot define green. So how do you define something intrinsically? It's by its characteristics, the necessary and sufficient conditions. And in the debate in Addis Ababa, they say there are 4 necessary and sufficient conditions for the definition of the diaspora. First is a bloodline. Anybody who is born in the diaspora must have a trace of African blood. There must be African ancestry. Second is migration. You cannot sit down in your living room and you become a diaspora. You can't be a diaspora at all. There are certain serious questions raised there, and I will address it. But in any literature or something of the diaspora, if you are sitting there in your house and you say you are a diaspora, you are at home, I'm in my village and I'm diaspora, people felt no. The element of migration must be there. It will be composed of people of African heritage who have migrated from their continent, either in temporary or permanent terms. In this context, we recognize that there are 3 trends. Pre-slave trade, because migration took place before slave trade.
Right.
Slave trade migration, and post-slave trade. So you must have both ancient and modern diaspora. It must be an inclusive process, and that is.
Do it again. Yes, so sisters and brothers, this year the brother John Watusi Branch. On some 100 children might know him from the African Poetry Theater in Jamaica, Queens, and other rest of children might know him from down in South Kakalaki, where birth roots come from. How are you doing this morning, Brother Branch?
Oh, just fine, just fine. Glad to be here amongst the other Africans.
Yes, at the African Union. Yes. So now, what made you decide to come out to this affair today?
Well, you know, for 2 reasons. We've been working with Africa for the past 30 years in economic and cultural missions. And also I'm the Chief Secretariat of WADU, the World African Diaspora Union. So we're here also in addition to the African Poetry Theater. And we have been trying to be actively involved in the Unite Africa project, and also we have great concerns about our relationship, the diaspora relationship with Africa in terms of citizenship, and we have several economic projects going on in Africa, because our mission is to rescue the continent from foreign economic invaders. So we are trying to rally the people around these issues through the World African Diaspora Union, also in addition to the work of the African Union.
Excellent. Now I know that your roots stem from the Gullah Geechee Nation. Where exactly are you from, and what have you been doing in terms of any linkages with some of your other work? We know that you do a lot of trips back and forth to the motherland, involved with different enterprises there. How do you think all of this links up in terms of your birth heritage and the rest of the diaspora that you're talking about uniting?
Well, I mean, you know, the Gullah Geechee area has always maintained some ties, some roots to African culture, and I guess that's in the blood, you know, to continue to reconnect, you know, our folks in the diaspora to our roots in Africa. That's a lifelong mission, and so I guess it all stems from there. You know, many of us have never really forgotten our roots since we landed on these shores in chains, and we have always tried to reestablish our identity as African people. And the Gullah Geechee area is one of the bastions of that connection. It's just like other places in the Caribbean, you know. And so it's just, I guess, in the DNA.
I know that's right. I know that's right. So we're so glad, Hunter, today you're here at the African Union, and so glad to see you one more again for this your Gullah Geechee TV. Thank you, thank you.